Have you ever had to choose between protecting your team and protecting yourself, and it really didn't feel like a choice at all? And maybe you've been told that, well, you always have a choice, and you just felt like punching somebody. And if I'm honest, in a lot of the keynote talks that I do tell people that you've always got a choice. But I've noticed that even though it's totally true, we always do have a choice, it doesn't seem to help. As a mother, I have a choice about whether I go and pick up my daughter from her netball match late at night. I could just leave her. It is a choice, but of course I'm not going to do that. It feels like I don't have a choice. And sometimes when we're really struggling, when we know we always have a choice, but still we are choosing to carry on doing those things that are edging us towards burnout rather than drawing boundaries or saying no, it just becomes another thing to feel guilty about. And so today, I just want to unpick why this phrase, you always have a choice, can be so problematic, particularly for professionals in high stress, high stakes jobs like healthcare, where you feel responsible for everybody and everything. And genuinely, the buck often stops with you. There's been quite a few occasions in the past year where I've been up till midnight, putting the finishing touches on a project that really, really matters, that's going live the next day, that one of my team could have done, but it wasn't quite right. And I needed just to make sure that it was perfect because I wanted to make sure that what we were trying to say really landed right. And I would say to myself, well, this is my choice. This is my choice to stay up to midnight doing this. But actually, it didn't really feel like I had a choice because I really care about my work and I care about what I say to people and I care that it's right. So my choice was just leave it and let it go out when it's not finished, when it looks bad, or I could wake one of the team up and say, well, you need to sort it out. And that just didn't feel right because I didn't want to let people down and I didn't want to put extra pressure on my team. And the thought that I was causing extra stress for other people, I just didn't want to live with that. So even though I knew I had a choice to leave it, it wasn't really a choice. It was an impossible choice because that option came with a massive dose of shame. And if I've learned anything through doing this podcast, we'll do anything to avoid shame. So even though you always have a choice is technically true, I would challenge this and I would say, actually, for doctors and people in high stress, high stakes jobs, lots of choices come really loaded with guilt, fear, and shame. So the choice just doesn't feel available to us. These are impossible choices. Things like protecting my time versus protecting my team's time, or protecting my energy versus meeting my patient's needs, or even keeping harmony and peace versus causing problems and raising issues. And so when the option to protect myself triggers shame, my brain just files it under not an option. That is not a valid choice. And so you choose the patient or the team or the deadline over yourself, even if the cost is burnout in the long run. So I'm calling these impossible choices. Now, an impossible choice is a decision. It looks binary because one option comes with a massive threat and your nervous system just won't tolerate that threat in the moment, mainly because of your programming as a doctor, as a healthcare professional, as a senior leader or manager, somebody who always helps people, who's always the good one, who never ever dumps on colleagues. And side note, in the work that we do, we found that the one thing people fear more than anything is the impression that they are dumping on colleagues or shirking their responsibility. Now, the threats to our nervous system of these impossible choices fall into three main categories. Firstly, it's the harm, threat of harm. So somebody might get hurt, or somebody might be inconvenienced, or even just made to feel a bit stressed or tired. And we fear this. We fear causing hurt or harm to other people, and we feel really guilty about it. There's then the social threat, the threat of being judged, misunderstood, rejected, blamed. All that stuff that goes with people pleasing, trying to maintain a good impression. And I've talked about this before, but I recently realized that people pleasing is in fact more like trying to control somebody else's opinion of me. And as a doctor, as a professional, other people's opinions of me, well, that's really valuable to me and that's really important. So if that is in question, then I might feel a little bit of shame. I'll feel guilty if I've hurt somebody. So you've got the threat of harm, the threat of being disliked, the social threat. You've also got the threat to your identity. The threat that says, well, I'm not a good doctor if I do that thing that's going to protect me. And that leads into, I'm not a good person, I'm not good. And that leads to a lot of shame. And shame is absolutely toxic. And like I said earlier, we will do anything to avoid shame. And if you just add into the mix a massive dose of time pressure, then this all becomes just too much to cope with. So this really, really matters, because if we just keep telling ourselves, well, I've always got a choice, I've got a choice, why aren't I taking the choice that I know I need to do? Well, we just have more self-blame, more shitting on ourselves, and we just fall into the same old patterns. But if rather than saying to ourselves, well, I've always got a choice, we say to ourselves, actually, this feels like an impossible choice, we can then identify and work with the real drivers underneath it. Work out what the real problem is, and then we can fix it. Then we can get some options. You see, I know that doctors would actually often rather burn out than pay the short-term shame tax of protecting themselves and tolerating those difficult emotions that come with going against your programming. So we need to take these impossible choices and we need to turn them into choices we can actually do. So how do we do this? Well, I think there are three main steps. The first step is to spot it and name it. So the telltale signs of you facing an impossible choice are you feel like you're backed into the corner. You feel like you're in your sympathetic nervous system zone when you're in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. You've got adrenaline racing around your body. You can't think straight. Every decision becomes very, very black and white. You feel anxious. You might feel your heart beating fast. You might just feel incredibly stressed, or you might feel like you're very, very calm, but actually underneath you're simmering. Or you might find yourself fawning, becoming over helpful. And this is a response I've noticed that lots of us go into. You know that you are facing an impossible choice when everything feels very, very binary, very black and white. And that's actually a hallmark of being in your fight, flight or freeze zone. The hallmark of being in that threat amygdala hijack zone is that your thinking becomes very black and white and you cannot think outside the box. It's actually quite difficult to be empathetic as well. And actually that is quite useful, because if there's a lion running towards you about to eat you, you don't need to be empathetic towards the lion or thinking outside the box. You just need to leg it. So what's happened is that your brain has sent the blood to your big muscles so you can run away. So you don't actually have as much energy and fuel in your brain to be able to make good decisions. So you get this very binary thing of either I stay late or the patient suffers, or either I do it or I'm dumping on my team and everybody else has to do it. Or I'm on call, therefore it is definitely my responsibility. And if I leave that thing, then I am shirking. So number one is just to recognize this is an impossible choice moment here. My options have suddenly shrunk. And there will be lots of things that we're doing to ourselves to make this seem like a very binary choice. And I've talked about the overwhelm amplifiers before, but these are part of our programming again. We feel very responsible for everybody and everything, even when we have no control over things. We have been programmed to think that we are superheroes, that we can actually cope with more than other people. We don't need as much sleep or as much rest. We don't need to take breaks, have lunch, all those sorts of things, which, as we know, is absolute nonsense. We've also been programmed to be really, really nice. So we'll avoid conflict, we'll avoid upsetting people. We've been programmed to think that the harder I work, the more successful I'll be, and that everything has to be perfect, because let's face it, we've been judged by our outputs all of our lives. So a lot of these things, they're real strengths, which mean that we can do very difficult jobs, but often these are kryptonite. They are our biggest strengths and our biggest weaknesses. So one of the ways that this shows up for me is when something comes up and needs doing really urgently, and it's not really my job, but I know I can do it. I think to myself, well, I can't possibly leave this or disturb one of my team when maybe they're not working, or it'll mean their day is really disruptive. Even if it is their job, I can't possibly inconvenience them and make them overwork or stay late because of me. So I go into that rescuing, that protecting mode, which isn't helpful for me, isn't helpful for anybody. So when you have spotted that you're in an impossible choice situation, you then need to name the story that's going on underneath it. So is it one of the overwhelm amplifiers like conflict avoidance or the rescuing mentality or the superhero delusion. You can ask yourself, what story is making this feel impossible? What's underneath? What's my programming here? The things we hear all the time for people in our training sessions is, well, if I don't do it, no one else will. If I'm saying no, I'm letting people down. And if anything goes wrong, it'll be my fault. So hear the rescuer and the superhero in all of that. The other thing we hear a lot of is, if I don't do it now, I'll just have to do it tomorrow. That's the urgency trap where everything feels urgent and important. And actually, in that scenario, we think that the same amount of work when we're depleted at the end of the day is going to yield the same results as doing something when we're fresh in the morning. And of course it's not. So that binary thing really doesn't work. The other question you can ask yourself if you want to uncover these stories is, what am I protecting here at my cost? So am I protecting my team's well-being or my reputation? And am I really in control of that? Is that even possible? Because the next question is, what is in my zone of power? And the zone of power is just one of the shapes we use in our shapes toolkit. It's a simple circle on a piece of paper that tells you what's in your control and what's not in your control. So everything in your control goes in your zone of power, and everything outside of your control goes outside your zone of power. Now, I would say that the well-being of my team is pretty much outside of my control because there's so many factors that I can't influence. But yet I feel very responsible for them. And doctors and high-stakes professionals, we're very good at feeling very responsible for stuff that's totally outside our control, like waiting lists, like funding, like company policy, nothing we can do anything about. And we feel guilty about that. And I've done lots of podcasts about this. And one of the things I suggest is we stop feeling guilty about stuff we can't control. And we maybe change that to feeling guilt-ish. I care deeply about it, but I can't carry it. It's not my responsibility because it's not under my control. So a great question to ask yourself when you want to name this story and spot the impossible choices. Am I feeling guilty about something that I can't control? And if it is outside my control, what is the responsible action? Maybe I can document it or let somebody know. Now, if it is in your control, the next question to ask is, well, do I even have capacity? And yes, you could try and slot in every single person that wants a bit of you, but you can't. So you need to decide what you're going to focus on. And one of the things is to get really clear about what your role is. Saying, well, is this actually my job to do? And many of us work in jobs where our roles are really, really muddy and we don't actually know what we're expected to do and what we're not. So getting clear on this could be one really helpful action you could do. Because just taking everything on, that's over responsibility, and it often masquerades as professionalism, thinking, well, I'm the only person that can do this. Are you? Are you really? And so one question to ask, which can be quite helpful, is, am I doing this because it's mine or just because it's really uncomfortable to hand it back? See, I think as doctors and senior professionals, we unconsciously take the default responsibility for many, many things. And side note, I realised this recently when I've been really thinking about boundaries and why doctors have trouble saying no. And sometimes I realise they have trouble saying no because they never actually said yes in the first place. Stuff has just landed on them and they've unconsciously assumed the default responsibility, so they never had the opportunity to say no. So by the time they want to actually lose that task or not do that thing, it doesn't just feel like saying no, it feels like an absolute abdication of their responsibility. And as I said earlier, shirking responsibility, dumping on colleagues, is almost one of the 7 deadly sins of being a doctor. So just asking yourself, well, what part of this is mine and what part have I just unconsciously picked up can be very helpful. And then finally, when you're spotting it and naming it, you could ask yourself, well, would somebody else with different programming to me think that this was an impossible choice or not? I remember once I was having my nails done at the beautician's, and halfway through, this woman ran in and she was in floods of tears. She was almost hysterical. And the lady doing my nails, she got up and she said, well, how can I help you? And this woman said, I'm getting married tomorrow and the person that was supposed to do my waxing has just cancelled on me. What am I going to do? And, she was in a real bind. And I could see that the lady doing my nails was really compassionate and empathetic. And she said, I'm so sorry, that's awful. She said, let me see what I can do. So she looked at her list for the day. And she saw that it was totally full up. And she said to the lady, I'm so sorry, but I don't have any space. You could try my colleague down the road, but I can't fit you in. Now, it made me think, well, gosh, if that was me, if that was a surgery and we had someone come in with a pretty trivial problem, we would just feel like we had to fit them in, like we'd automatically taken on the responsibility for this person's issues. Whereas my beautician, she didn't feel like that. She appropriately took responsibility for seeing if she could help, and when she realised she couldn't, she didn't take on the responsibility for that. Now, it has a happy ending, this story, because I actually said to this lady, look, I've got something else, but you can take my slot. Your need is much greater than me. And it all got done. It was fine. But it really struck me the way that this person was really compassionate, really empathetic, yet still did not take on that extra responsibility and try and fix it and try and rescue things, because it just wasn't hers to take. So if you think of my beautician, if they had that programming as opposed to the doctor programming of I must help every single person that I come across, no matter how important or trivial their needs are, would they be experiencing this as an impossible choice or not? So that's the first thing. Spot it and name it. The second step is to get informed consent from yourself. So what on earth am I talking about? Well, before you do any procedure or an operation, you make sure that you get informed consent from a patient. So you make sure the patient has capacity, that they can understand, weigh up and communicate a decision. You make sure the choice is voluntary, it's not made under pressure, and you make sure it's informed. So you've talked through the benefits, the risks, the alternatives, and even the option to do nothing. You also need to know what really matters to the patient. They need to be given time to think about it, to ask questions. And also there's this thing about ongoing consent. You check in again. You don't just assume that because they said yes once, it keeps going. Now, if we did consent with patients, the way that we do decisions with ourselves would be struck off. So can I suggest that when you're faced with an impossible choice, you run a self-consent conversation? So first one, capacity. Now, we're not talking about capacity, do I have time? Capacity as in mental capacity. Am I in any fit position to actually make this decision right now? Because if I'm in the corner in my sympathetic zone, everything seems urgent. My decision-making is warped. I'm not at my best here. Taking a pause will be your friend. Getting back to baseline. Making sure I'm in my parasympathetic zone before I do anything else. Secondly, is it voluntary? This impossible choice I'm having to make. So am I being coerced into making it by myself? Am I guilting myself into doing the thing that's protecting other people and not me? So I think that the people that put the biggest pressure on us are ourselves, not necessarily other people, although other people can also make us feel bad. I can think back to times when I was really ill and the impossible choice seemed to be letting all my colleagues down or going off sick and looking after myself. And did my colleagues say, oh, Rachel, you should just go off sick? No, they didn't. Of course not. They wanted me around because it just meant more work for them. So there is this nagging coercion by ourselves and by other people, by feeling guilt, by feeling shame, by this identity as a good doctor, fear of judgment, and yes, sometimes this workplace culture. So one helpful thing is just to name this explicitly. So say, well, actually, I'm not freely choosing this. I'm being pushed by fear of looking lazy, for example, or I'm being pushed by fear of letting people down. Now, the next step is to be informed and give yourself the time to consider all the information just like you do with the patient. So you need to look at the risks and the benefits. Now, one structure that people use for talking about risks and benefits with patients is the BRAN framework. It's a framework developed and used in shared decision-making. And we'll put links to it in the show notes. But BRAN just basically stands for benefits, risks, alternatives, and nothing. So firstly, you look at the benefits. If I make this impossible choice, right, what are the benefits? It might be, actually, we genuinely keep somebody safe. We genuinely avoid a big clinical disaster. So what improves? Who is helped? What risk is reduced? Now, we're really good at seeing this. We're really good at seeing the benefits of sacrificing ourselves, right? We're not very good at the next bit, R for risks. So say if I'm being asked to stay late, do something extra, and I can see a clear potential benefit, but I'm not really looking at the risks. And it's not just the risk of, well, I'm going to feel tired, but there's also some other risks, such as, well, I might make some bigger errors tomorrow. I'm going to have reduced empathy with people. I might be becoming unsafe. There might be strain on my relationships at home, all those things. And this is where it gets really tricky, because the short-term difficulty, the short-term harm, it's often shouting at you in the face, whereas the long-term stuff, it's a bit more difficult to put your finger on it. But here's some things that might help. So you can reality test your fear. So when you can see a real risk right at the beginning of something that might happen immediately, we need to start thinking about the consequences and think, well, what's the actual consequence and how likely is it to be? One of my most popular keynote talks is all about how to say no when someone might die. And if someone might genuinely die, then you probably wouldn't say no. But I've asked hundreds and hundreds of people what stops them saying no. Because the reason most people trust Howard is, I can't say no because of patient harm. And I put this to the test. I've done lots of Zoom polls, or if it's face-to-face, we've done sort of standing up or raise hands polls. And in all the time I've been doing these polls, less than 20% of people have said that actually the reason they can't say no is because of patient harm. Most people say it's because they're frightened of what other people might think. They don't want to inconvenience people, or they would just feel far too guilty. So we often catastrophize things, say, well, if I don't do this, or if I don't make this impossible choice, everything's going to go really, really bad. But actually think about, how often does that happen, and how likely is that to happen, really? And actually, what are the likely consequences? Because if the likely consequences are, really serious, then you're going to probably have a low threshold for trying to avoid those, right? And dreadful patient harm, we really want to avoid, but maybe someone having a slightly lower opinion of you, well, that's not quite as bad, is it? We can probably learn to tolerate that. So I always say in my How to Say No, Set Boundaries and Deal with Pushback talk, I think the question isn't how do you say no when someone's going to die? It's how do I deal with my own people-pleasing, perfectionism and fear of complaints? So first of all, just like reality test what the consequences might be. Secondly, think about your own values. What do you want to be able to say about this later? And this really helps when both options feel really awful, like letting your team down feels awful, but also letting yourself and your family down feels awful. Think about what choice would align with the doctor or the leader I really want to be. And perhaps even what would I write in the notes or explain at an incident review? What's the most defensible and self-respecting option? And another thing I like to ask is, what would the future me thank me for? Would they thank me for just caving in and going with my amygdala response, or would they thank me for actually choosing to protect myself? And this leads on to the next question that you can ask yourself here is, what am I trading away if I say yes? And these are hidden trades that aren't obvious at the time. So being fresh for tomorrow's clinical presentation, or making good decisions for the rest of the week, time with my family, the people that are most important to me. And I recently heard the term residual beneficiary. And for many, many of us, our families, the people that are most important to us in the world, are just the residual beneficiaries of our time and attention. Do I really want my family, my partner, my kids to feel like that? No, I don't. So I might be trading the relationships with the nearest and dearest people to me. I might be trading my sleep. So something you can ask yourself, well, if I do this, what will I not do? And is that acceptable? The other thing we need to think about is, what precedent, what pattern am I creating here? And you might talk a really good game about setting boundaries, about self-care, about looking after yourself. But senior people, you teach the system what is normal by what you absorb. So if your juniors can see you staying late, absorbing everyone else's stuff, guess what they're going to learn? Guess what they're going to think is normal and the way ahead? And if you always rescue people, the system just gets groomed to expect you to rescue them. And if you always stay late, the organisation just really quietly budgets for that unpaid labour that you're going to do. So one thing you can ask yourself is, well, if I do this today, am I willing for this to become the expectation? And is this really what I want to role model to everybody else? So those are ways of working out the risks and the benefits of these impossible choices. So B, benefits, R, risks. Now the A in BRAN stands for alternative. What alternatives do you have? Because when we're in the corner, when we're faced with these impossible choices, it feels like a binary decision, but there might be a third way. There might be a third option that we just can't see at the time. And this might be much, much better. For example, if I think about that time when I was up till midnight putting the final touches on a website page before we launched a new product, something I could have done is just think, well, actually, what is good enough? What is good enough and done? Because we know that good enough and done is better than perfect and pending. How can I lower the bar? Or you could ask yourself, well, what little bits are the real deal breakers that need to be done now and what can wait? Or what's the minimal help I can give that's going to really help that person? Or if you're feeling like, well, I've got to do things now because otherwise I'll just have to do them tomorrow, you can ask, well, what are the real deal breakers that you need to do now? The really important stuff that will mean you can get home and leave till tomorrow, where a lot of stuff may have disappeared, or you might be able to think outside the box and think how you can delegate it, get some help with it, or even drop some of it. So the N in BRAN stands for nothing, no action. So what happens if I just don't make that impossible choice? Because I'm sure you've been in a situation where you've thought something's really urgent and really, really important, and then something comes up, like one of your kids is ill, or you've got to go to hospital, or there's a real family emergency, and you just drop the work and you go off and do that. And actually, nothing bad really happened. So if we can do that when there's an emergency, then we can do it at other times as well. So that BRAN framework, thinking about the benefits, the risks, the alternatives, and what happens if you do nothing, that will really help you with your informed consent. But if you think about consent with patients, consent isn't a one-off signature, it's ongoing, and patients get time to consider things. So you might need to give yourself some time or even get a second opinion about this decision. So for self-consent, you might want to think to yourself, well, can I decide in 10 minutes rather than now? Give myself a pause, give myself time to get out of the corner, out of my sympathetic threat zone and back into rest and digest, where I can make better decisions. And you could think, well, who can I really reality check this with? Do I have a colleague, a partner, a clinical director, or just a good friend that I can run this by and get an unbiased opinion? And then, of course, with patient consent, they can withdraw it whenever they want to. You mustn't assume ongoing consent. And I think this could be a real game changer. Now, one of my real values is when I say yes, I mean yes. And when I say no, I mean no. But sometimes that hasn't stood me very well, because it means I've persisted with things just because I've said yes in the past. And I think I need to see it out to the bitter end. And just because you've said yes once, it doesn't mean that you need to stick to it. Because to persist down one course of action when it's obviously not going well for you, it's just madness if you know that you haven't got capacity and it's causing harm. Now, that's not flakiness. That is wisdom. So let's just learn not to put ourselves in shackles by what we've already agreed to. It is okay to change your mind. Doesn't mean that you're a really flaky person, believe me. So one thing you could do, you could sort of consent to the next 20 minutes, or you can say, well, I'll do that tiny thing now. I'm going to revisit this tomorrow with a fresh brain and take time to review it, get a second opinion, because you need to make sure you have got self-informed consent, because if it's not informed, it's not consent, it's just coercion, obedience or compliance. And compliance, which is done out of guilt, shame or fear, that is what's burning doctors out. So next time you catch yourself saying, like, I have no choice, I've got to do this, and pause, take a breath, and do what you'd want any patient to do. Get informed consent from yourself. Ask yourself those BRAN questions, make a real choice, and make one that protects both you and the people that you care for. So informed self-consent helps you know the risks and the benefits, and helps you turn an impossible choice into a doable decision. So step 3 is to reframe this choice into a doable decision. And this is where you just really widen your options and you reclaim your agency. And the one thing I have found invaluable over the last few years is to use power mantras, and it just sort of combines everything that we've talked about. Now, a power mantra is 3 lines. The first one is, I am choosing to, or I'm choosing not to. What are you choosing to or not to do? So it could be, I'm choosing to go home and not see that extra walk-in patient that's not really urgent. It could mean, I'm choosing not to volunteer for that departmental project that needs to be done. What is it that you are choosing to do? The next line is so that. What are the benefits of this choice that you're going to make? I'm choosing to go home so that I can be re-energized and fresh for that really long on-call day I have tomorrow. So we know why we're doing it. We're looking at the long-term benefits, not the short-term benefits. And then the last line that we need, and we mustn't miss this line out, is even if. Even if, what is the risk? What might occur? What's this short-term hurt that's going to put you in the corner and get you really worried? Even if my colleagues think I'm dumping on them, let's predict it. Even if I get pushback from people, even if I get a complaint, it brings it out into the open and it makes it less scary. And we think, well, yeah, okay, I probably could cope with a complaint because I know that clinically that was a safe decision. And if I'm not fresh for tomorrow, I might make much, much worse decisions. So putting these things together in power mantras can be really, really helpful. So I'm just going to go through a few scenarios which might help. First one, it could be an impossible choice of me versus patient safety, which is the harm threat. So it could be something like, well, either I stay late and keep patients safe or I go home and someone gets harmed. That is an impossible choice, right? No doctor would agree to that. But let's think what the long-term harm of that might be. Well, if you keep making patient safety means self-sacrifice, you eventually become the unsafe variable. You're exhausted, you're slower, more error prone and more likely to leave. So let's think what a doable decision might be. So that power mantra might be the one that I just talked to you about. I'm choosing to go home and say no to that extra patient task so I can preserve my energy for my on-call day tomorrow and connect with my family, even if there is a small chance that something out of my control might go wrong. So it's about weighing up the risks and benefits, isn't it? And, we are not advocating putting patients at risk. Absolutely not. If there is a significant risk of patient harm, then of course we will make sure the patient is safe. Now, the third options here might be you ask yourself, well, what's the minimum safe standard? What must I do today to prevent harm and everything else can wait? Or I'll do a little bit of a safety triage. I'll do the top risk items and then I'll hand over everything else. Or I will time box the care. I'll go, well, I can do 15 minutes now safely, then I must stop. Let's look at another thing that people say to me all the time. Well, if I don't do it, one of my team will have to do it. I dump it on my colleagues. Well, let's look at the risks and benefits. The long-term harm is if you keep rescuing the team, you just become the bottleneck and the buffer. Over time, you burn out while the team never builds sustainable load sharing habits. So your doable decision might look like this. I'm choosing to leave this to be done by the rest of the team so that everybody's taking on their own share of the responsibility, doing what's on their job description, and I get to my more important tasks, even if the team feel unsupported at times. And I don't like the thought that my team might feel unsupported, but actually that's the lesser of the two evils, right? Here's one about reputation. So either I say yes and I look like a good doctor, or I say no and look lazy and difficult. I'm sure we've all had this. Well, the long-term harm in that is, well, if you keep paying for approval from your colleagues with overwork, then you're teaching people that your boundaries are negotiable and you end up trapped and performing the good doctor at the cost of your health and your home life. You'll get those residual beneficiaries at home. A doable decision might look like this. I'm choosing to make the right and rational decision on this so that I can protect my time and focus on the other important stuff that needs doing, even if somebody else is disappointed, even if my reputation suffers. That's difficult, isn't it? To think that my reputation might suffer, but really we can't control other people's opinions of us anyway. Let's look at a couple more. Have you ever thought this? Well, either I push on through like a proper professional, or I'm just weak and selfish and can't cope. The long-term risk, well, if you keep proving you're fine, you erode your basic recovery time and the price shows up later as burnout or compassion fatigue or needing much longer time off. So there are some alternatives. You could reframe breaks as patient safety. So rest breaks mean safer decisions and fewer errors. And your power mantra here would be, I'm choosing to take a proper lunch break today so that I have enough energy for the tough clinic this afternoon, even if I don't get everything on my to-do list done. There's the thing about integrity versus realistic capacity. So our impossible choice might be, well, I said I'd do it, so I have to, even if it wrecks me. But long term, if you keep honouring promises by breaking yourself, you eventually become unreliable anyway, because your capacity will just collapse. You can't keep any promises at all. So your doable decision might look like, well, I'm choosing to change my mind and say I can't do this particular task so that I can fulfill my other more important and pressing responsibilities, even if people think I'm flaky. And finally, here's one I think that we can all identify with. Well, either I do it now or I'm going to suffer later. So the impossible choice here is, well, the work is fixed. If I don't do it tonight, I'm just ruining tomorrow. Well, if we really look at the risks and benefits, the long-term harm for this could be, well, if you keep saving tomorrow by stealing from your sleep today, then actually tomorrow gets worse. Your speed and your judgment and your prioritization, well, they'll drop. The backlog will grow anyway because you're running on fumes, and you can do things so much better when you're well rested, and you'll do things quicker. So it's not a fixed amount of time anyway. So the power mantra would be, I'm choosing to stop work before I've completed everything so that I can re-energize and rest and get it done quicker another time, even if there's stuff that I will have to do tomorrow. And the alternatives here now are just do a tiny slice now and leave breadcrumbs for tomorrow, so you know exactly what you've got to do tomorrow, so you don't have to think and do things twice. Now, that's a lot, but I just want to introduce to you the concept that the only way to make these impossible choices feel like doable decisions is to analyse them, to look at it and go, is that really true? Have I really got informed consent on this? And what short-term hurt am I trying to avoid by creating long-term problems for myself? Now, there are some mistakes that we can make in all of this. And firstly, some people just pretend that every impossible choice is solvable with some mindset shifts. And that's just not true. Some choices are genuinely brutal, but you want to be really accurate about the actual consequences. We don't want to ignore patient safety or proper, real, difficult, important consequences. But in my experience, it's mostly not about the consequences or patient harm. It's more about other people's opinions of us and feeling guilty for stuff we're not in control of anyway. The next thing we can do is believing that what our amygdala is telling us when we're in our threat zone is real and is very logical. Doctors are really, really brilliant at sounding very calm and thinking they're thinking from logic when actually they're making fear-based decisions, and we're actually fawning rather than being really professional. Another mistake we often make is just looking at the binary thing. Often these third options, that is where the real relief lives. And doing it too quick, doing it in the moment while we're in our fight, flight or freeze zones, rather than letting ourselves have a bit of time to actually consider this. And if you really don't have time in the moment and you find yourself really stuck with this, then afterwards, debrief yourself, use a journal, talk to somebody so that next time it becomes easier. So if the truism that you've always got a choice actually makes you feel worse, then don't worry, there's nothing wrong with you. I find that really difficult as well, because often the choices that we do have just feel impossible. And these impossible choices feel impossible because of the shame and the guilt and the fear price tag. The way to deal with it is firstly spot it and name that fear, shame or guilt story. Get informed consent. Give yourself time. Go through the BRAN framework. Think about the benefits, the risks, the alternatives, and what would happen if you do nothing. Know that you can change your mind, that you need time to think about alternatives, and shift them into doable decisions by thinking about what alternatives you've got and using the power mantras where you know that the long-term harm is much, much worse than the short-term hurt. And so you're able to make that decision. There's always going to be really difficult decisions in life, choices that feel impossible. And if I've learned one thing recently is that you can't please everybody all of the time. The sooner we can start to tolerate other people not totally approving of us, other people not getting us, the better. But the person we really, really need to learn to tolerate their disapproval is ourselves. We need to learn to give ourselves permission to do things that might trigger some fear, shame, or guilt, but know that the alternative is even worse. Know that we are doing these things having really thought about it, because we do need to learn to disappoint other people. Otherwise, we'll end up disappointing everybody, including ourselves. So you don't have to stop caring about this stuff. You just have to make sure you are properly informed and giving informed self-consent about some of these decisions, examining them, and then choosing the doable decision that's going to keep you well, that's going to keep you working, that's going to beat burnout and help you enjoy your job again in the long run. So this week, just notice one impossible choice you're facing. And when you notice it, do a 30-second BRAN check before you act. Work out what the benefits, the risks, the alternatives, and what doing nothing might entail. And if you want more scripts, practical tools to make these decisions in real time, then come and join us in FrogXtra or FrogXtra Gold, because this is exactly the sort of thing we like to talk about at FrogFest, our twice yearly virtual conference, and in the monthly Hot Topic podcast, and in the short videos we send out every month. So go well. And I would love to hear about some impossible choices that you've turned into doable decisions in our You Are Not a Frog Facebook group. Let us know, what have you tried? What has worked? What hasn't? And do you have any other top tips to share with us? And I'll see you for the next quick dip.